Okay, great. Welcome to Chapters and Chats. I want to be clear before we start that our book club, everybody that's on tonight has read the book.
Mhm.
So we are really eager for a spoiler-filled discussion. But we have a lot of readers that join online and watch our YouTube recording. A majority of our readers do that. So if you have not finished the Mad Wife book,
Mhm.
please stop watching this and come back after you finished it because we're going to spoil the book right here. So do not continue if you haven't read the book. So that's our caveat.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. And thank you so much for also mentioning the spoilers because I got so nervous. I mean, you've read the book, so you know, right? And then like all the early reviews, I'm like, please, nobody spoil it, nobody spoil it. So, because it's just to go into the story, I think with a little bit of blindness is definitely beneficial, but I'm so happy to be here tonight to be able to talk spoilers because you all are the first group, the first book club group that I have spoken with. So this is the first time I can have freedom in conversation and discussion too. So I am so happy to be with you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, congratulations on the reception that this book has gotten. Just with being, first of all, like the Barnes and Noble pick, and then moving the publication day up, and then the Aardvark book box pick, and then being like on the USA Today and New York Times bestseller list. Like, what a dream for you.
Yeah, it has been a wild ride, and especially having previously published two other books, I know what quieter releases look like, right? And so this one has just been an absolute whirlwind. And I joke that I think it's just like Lulu. She was so like excited for her story to get out there that she just could not wait any longer. And she has just had us on a wild ride since the publication. So Mhm.
Incredible. Congratulations.
thank you.
I'm sure you've
I
been
will
busy.
say too, like our book community, at least with like Bookstagram and all that, they've been so cautious and so they all the reviews that we read are first of all so positive, and second of all, no spoilers. Everybody's so careful with that spoiler that's just so
Good.
helpful to everybody. People say you have to read, you have to see the twist, you have to, and
Mhm.
that's just made everybody else just want to read it more. Um,
Nice.
so it's been fun for the readers to just get these little clues, but in a
Nice.
really great, respectful way.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I haven't seen any spoilers or anything where I'm like,
Oh,
what?
thank goodness.
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So to start us off, would you just talk to us a little bit about the inspiration for the Mad Wife?
Yeah, so the inspiration actually came in a time of failure because I had a two-book deal to start with, and both of those books were published, and it was time to pitch my next idea to my editor. And I gave her two ideas. Neither one of them were the Mad Wife, and she passed on both of those. And as I was trying to pivot and figure out what I was going to work on next, I just came across the history of hysteria and just how that was a blanket diagnosis for women. The more that I dug into it, the more I realized that, it was sometimes a silencing tactic, but not just that, it also meant that sometimes they were not sufficiently diagnosed with what was really ailing them, right? And so, especially in that post-war era when, these housewives were supposed to be living the American dream with their auto defrost refrigerators and their, dishwashers and all of that kind of stuff. And sometimes it was merely boredom, and other times there were bigger issues at play. And when a blanket diagnosis is given and maybe a mild tranquilizer, to make them happy and content, then really what is happening beneath the surface is not actually being addressed. And so the more I dug into that research and that history of hysteria, the more this Lulu character just began to present herself. And I just asked my agent, I said, "Hey, what do you think of this idea?" And she said, "I think you're on to something, keep digging." And I took a couple of months to really put that concept together. When the twist came to me, I was like, this is it. This is the story. As long as I can pull it off, I think I got something here. And so, yeah, so it was a process to work through that. I have two daughters who are early readers and also they help me brainstorm. So with this one, because of the twist, they can also sniff out like a plot twist in an instant. You show them a movie and you're like, they're never going to solve this, and they do. So I use that to my advantage with this one. And with my oldest, who was about 15 at the time, I said, okay, here's the concept. Help me work this out. And then with my younger one, who was about 12 at the time, we kept her completely in the dark and we gave her an early draft of it. And she knew very little about it. And I just said, read it. Let me know if you figure it out. And she didn't. She did not see the twist coming. And I knew I was onto something and I knew I had a story then.
What a fun family affair. How sweet to involve
Yeah.
your girls in like such a historical, like wonderful story about women too, and just
Yeah.
empowering. That's great.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit about your research process, particularly with the medical history, like you said, of the
Mhm.
blanket diagnosis of hysteria and lobotomies, as well as like Milltown, the
Yeah.
mother's helper?
Yes, the mother's little helper. Yeah. It was actually when I was working on my second book, The Girls We Sent Away, I came across the Rolling Stones song Mother's Little Helper, and that just really piqued my interest. And that was kind of one of the first seeds for what became the Mad Wife too, was then looking into what the little yellow pill was, and Milltown was really like the first mild tranquilizer that was on the market. And so the research, I'm actually going to grab a book here. This was a primary source for me. Unwell Women. Let me read the subtitle: Misdiagnosis and Myth in a Man-Made World by Eleanor Cleghorn. This is an amazing read, and I turned to that for a lot of that early research. But actually, research came from very strange sources this time around for me, and one of those sources was YouTube. And I happened upon this video early on in the process of this woman she was almost dressed like Laura Petrie from Dick Van Dyke Show. You know, she's got like her sort of crop shirt on and her pants, and she's sitting cross-legged on her therapist couch. And this is a therapy session that is being recorded in like the 50s or the 60s. And it's this really grainy black and white video. And of this woman just sitting there, she starts off smoking a cigarette and she says she doesn't like it when it's quiet. And then she just keeps talking. And you can tell she's kind of holding some stuff back, but you can also tell she's trying to, say certain things to her psychiatrist. And so basically, she goes on to bring up some childhood trauma of sexual assault. She talks about how she wants to divorce her husband, but then she puts all the blame on herself and she says that never mind, she just needs to get her nerves straightened out. And this video is posted on YouTube as a psychiatric training video, and the diagnosis that's given to her is hysteria. And first of all, HIPAA laws would not allow modern day videos like this to be recorded and posted for public consumption like that. But yet, we can still have these videos from the 50s and 60s. And so I watched that video again and again, just considering the mindset of the woman, like wondering what was going on inside of her. What else was she holding back and not sharing? And also, what did that feel like to receive that diagnosis? And so that really kind of planted the character in my mind. And then I fell down, you know how YouTube is with the algorithm. Then I started seeing all sorts of different videos like that. I watched videos on lobotomy and electroshock therapy, including interviews of people who have, been through both of those for themselves. I believe it was Dan Rather did an hour-long program about I think that one was lobotomy, and I watched that. And so there was a lot of video research that went into this book, which was very different from my first two. But it was a whole host of sources. And then, of course, I mean, you know, talking about Jello salads, I have fun little recipe books that I had to look through. And this one came thanks to eBay, the green stamps that are in the book. So I actually ordered a green stamp catalog. And so you can see the items, just so you know, nearly everything listed in the book actually came out of the catalog. And the booklets, the amount that you would have to cash in to receive the items is accurate. Now, I did make up the Wikiwachi visit to see the mermaids. That was not in the catalog. I think there was one other item I fudged, but otherwise, it all came from that. So it was just, as with research of any historical book, you sort of go in a whole variety of directions. Research and inspiration come from so many different places. Podcasts also played a role, and some of it too. That some of the YouTube research was watching videos of women who have been diagnosed with lupus. So some of the bizarre symptoms that Lulu experiences, like smelling colors and tasting sounds and things like that, those are actual very strange symptoms that women experienced when they were trying to receive their proper diagnosis. And so that was another way YouTube played a role in creating this book, was getting to watch women share their actual stories for themselves and then just taking notes on these bizarre, symptoms and everything that they experienced.
Well, you're touching on two questions that we actually talked about in our book club. With regards to lupus, how did that piece fall into place for the story? Because we were wondering how you had decided to weave that in and tie that in.
Yeah. So with lupus, at first, I always knew it was going to be a misdiagnosis, but I wasn't certain what it was going to be. I played around with MS at first. Diabetes was also another option. I knew it had to be autoimmune in some way, but lupus actually fit all once I started digging into lupus. And this is also where the book Unwell Women comes into play too. Because if I'm remembering correctly, the author has lupus herself. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. And so as I started looking at the symptoms, and then it just all the pieces started falling into place because women can, with lupus, lupus can flare during pregnancy, and women with lupus have higher rates of stillbirth. So all of this is fitting into exactly what I needed. And it also can have that genetic component. Now, Flannery O'Connor, I don't talk about this a lot in spoiler-free events because Flannery O'Connor's real life was inspiration for this. So it wasn't necessarily her storytelling, but it was her real life because she had lupus and her father also died of lupus. And so there's a movie called Wildcat that just came out within the last, it's been about a year. Ethan Hawke directed it. His daughter Maya stars in it as Flannery herself. And I watched that while I was away on a writer's retreat. And when Flannery, with her, when she got very sick on a train ride from New York City to her home in Georgia. I can't remember where exactly she lived in Georgia. And by the time she got home, she was extremely sick. And that was when her diagnosis of lupus was discovered. And it was a very crippling disease for her. She remained home with her mother until she passed away. And I can't remember how old she was, but she was still on the younger side when she died. So that was really, those were all the puzzle pieces that I needed because I knew the father died, and I knew, that it would need to be related. And so lupus just fit all of those different components that I needed for the story.
Interesting. Yeah, as a reader, I didn't know much about lupus, and so it's interesting to hear you kind of backtrack and say, oh, this and this, those symptoms that fit that piece. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's fascinating. The other question that we had in our book club discussion was about the lobotomies and
Mm.
how impaired a woman could be after receiving a lobotomy. And it sounds like I'm sure, are various, like
Yeah.
maybe a spectrum
Yep.
of how that can present. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. So with lobotomy, there is a wide range of how it would affect a person. There, I don't have the number in front of me, but especially in the early stages of practicing it, it was a very high mortality rate. And so, a fair amount of people lost their life to the procedure, but there are others who actually did live a more content life afterwards. Now, a lobotomy is severing the connection of the prefrontal cortex, right? And so the reason people, when it is deemed successful, are more content is because it basically removes the ability of the right and the left brains to communicate in that emotional sort of way, right? Now, um, so as far as the spectrum is concerned, I just want to bring up if anybody is familiar with Rosemary Kennedy, who was JFK's sister. And her father had her lobotomized when she was 23 years old. The reason she was lobotomized, first of all, her birth was a very traumatic experience where she was deprived of oxygen. It was a flu pandemic at the time. The doctor had not arrived. The nurse was too nervous to deliver a Kennedy baby without the doctor there. So the nurse held her in the birth canal until the doctor arrived. And it was something like, I forget the time, but it was like an hour long or something. And so Rosemary, her entire life, had developmental delays. She was different from the other Kennedy kids. And now we look back and we attribute that to the birth trauma that happened and the fact that she was probably oxygen deprived because of that birth. But in the time, they didn't necessarily know that. And so with the Kennedy family, when the father had aspirations for his sons to get into politics, she didn't fit the mold. And when she got into like her 20s, she started pushing back and rebelling, and they feared she was becoming promiscuous. And so the father's solution was to have her lobotomized, and it did not go well. And she was lobotomized by Dr. Freeman, who is actually the one who came up with the transorbital lobotomy, which goes through the eye socket. They call it the ice pick lobotomy because it uses an ice pick like tool to go in through the eye socket to sever the cortex. And so this was performed on her and it left her nonverbal and incapacitated. So his solution was to hide her away. So for the next, it was like 20 years, she was hidden away in a facility in Wisconsin. Her siblings had no idea where she was until their father passed away at the age, or in 1961. He passed away, and that was finally when the siblings got to know where she was and be reunited with her. So she was a case where she survived it, but it left her in a non-functioning capacity, basically. So again, wide spectrum. Some actually did see what people would consider to be improvements from the procedure, but it was always a very controversial procedure. And thankfully, in choosing when to set the story, I needed it to be set no later than the mid 1950s because that was when lobotomy really started to fall out of favor and really was not being practiced as much.
Interesting. Okay. So with the lobotomy, you did a little like bait and switch here for us because Ivana and I were talking about our reading experience. As a reader, you're kind of lulled into this day-to-day life with Lulu and, her fascination with Bitsy and her fears about the lobotomy. And so we're kind of heading in that direction. And then like the rug is pulled out and you're like, oh wait, no, we're not heading in that direction at all.
Mhm.
With your writing process, um did you kind of plan all of that out ahead of time? It sounds like you're a plotter, or are you a pantser?
I am a pantser. I'm trying to be in the middle.
Okay.
I'm getting better at doing some more upfront planning with each of my books. And with this one, it did require more planning upfront because I knew that I needed to hit the plot points. I needed to, not reveal too much too soon. And so there was a bit of planning that went into this. The other part of the picture here is that this was pitched with a synopsis in the first three chapters. So the whole story was not written when it was pitched. And so that synopsis did, in a way, act like an outline for me once my editor acquired the story and I got down to writing the whole thing. So there was a little bit of outlining of some sort that went into this one. But as I was writing it, I really thought of my father-in-law was a magician. And I really thought of him in the whole sleight of hand, right? So while you have someone looking over here, they're not paying attention to what's going on over here. And so really Bitsy, that's what she was. She was that foil basically for me to distract the reader from what was really going on with Lulu. And so that's, that was kind of the bait and switch of sorts that I was able to pull.
Yeah, you pulled it off beautifully.
Thank you.
So with that process of kind of leaning more into the domestic suspense genre, how was that different from your other two books? I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to. I'm very excited to now, but I think they're more firmly historical fiction. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And so, with me, I don't like speaking genre. I don't like classifying myself. That's a
Yeah.
marketing decision, right? But for me, it's always about the character. It's just, it starts with the situation. So with the Last Carolina Girl, it has to do with eugenics and forced sterilization and an orphan who's fighting against that, right? So as I get into that, to the situation that's happening at the time, then a character starts talking to me. In The Girls We Sent Away, it is a teenager who's up against a maternity home and forced adoption in the baby scoop era. And again, it was that baby scoop era, learning about that and that research that then presented the characters. So for this one, domestic suspense made sense because it was the story for Lulu. Now, I don't plan to stay in that genre. The thing I'm working on now is vastly different from that. It's really, I think what you will find is the similarity, the thread through my novels is being very character driven, being very empathy inducing, and heartfelt in that way. And all of them do have a little bit of a twist to them, but nothing like what the Mad Wife has. So just prepare yourself
Yeah.
for that difference.
Yeah, that's great just to set the reader up for some, some
Exactly. Yes.
expectations. Yes, yes. I wasn't expecting that. But yeah, I was curious what it was like just kind of making that shift. But it sounds like to you, it's just focusing on the character and then whatever genre the
Yep.
marketing team wants to plop on it is on them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. The Mad Wife touches on a lot of ways that women's health is dismissed or just blanketed, viewed as hysteria and as well as just societal expectations for
Mhm.
women is a huge part of that. I think in our book club we were talking about how now the rise of the trad wife and like influencer culture is
Yeah.
really coming around and modeling some of these like very traditional roles that you would have seen in the 1950s.
Mhm.
What do you hope readers take away regarding like a woman's role or just that traditional role that we've seen with Lulu's story?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's interesting that we do refer to that era as tradwife because honestly, before that time period, that was not the traditional role of women, right?
Mm,
And I
yeah.
mean, I come from farm life. I, grew up on a farm. I'm generations of farmers. And when I see this idealization of the tradwife, I am just like, where are they? This is not reality. I will tell you what farm life is like, and it ain't nothing like that. Like ballerina farmer,
Yes.
please, no, that is not reality whatsoever. And so for me, with all of my books, I've said that we have a tendency to look to our past through rose-colored glasses. But when we take off those rose-colored glasses and we stop looking simply through nostalgia, then what we see a lot of times will shake us, right? And that's what these stories are all explorations of an every woman attempting to live her life, but she comes up against extraordinary circumstances within the society she's living. And all of my books so far set in the Last Carolina Girls, the 1930s, the Girls We Sent Away, the 1960s, and now the Mad Wife, the 1950s. That's not all that long ago. Still historical, but not all that long ago. And I just think it's essential to really take a close look at how things actually have been instead of this, nostalgic rose-colored glasses glimpse at it. And the other thing to remind ourselves of is the generations have lived before us, and we have these shared struggles that we all experience, right? And I think that when we take a closer look at what history has actually been, it was Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so my hope is the more that we have a clearer perspective of how things have been in the past, then that means that our present and our future will not rhyme with some of those negative experiences that we have had in the past.
That's such an interesting reframe and just a good way to look at it. um Even too like Lulu, I'm sure on the on the outside to her friends she's looking like she's kind of got it all together. Her
Mhm.
jello salads are the just the envy of the neighborhood and but she's struggling
Right.
so much and um oh that reminds me in your I read in an interview that you did that did you make one of the jello salads?
I did the orange vomit, the
Oh,
sunshine vomit one. So, okay, growing up, really the only Jello salad I had, would not mentioned in the book, my grandmother who was diabetic, like her dessert, her go-to dessert was red Jello with bananas in it. Okay. And
okay.
so I still have fond memories of this one. I can tolerate that, but you do not put vegetables and tuna do not belong in gelatin. That is where I draw the line. And so as I was considering which salads to put into the book, like the perfection salad, which I believe is, well, kind of pictured on the cover of that cookbook, but It just the name of it, Perfection, too, was perfect for the story, but with like carrots and radishes and celery and no, and I was like, there's no way I'm tasting that one. But when it came to the Sunshine Vomit, I needed to know that it would fail in the way I had described it in the book. So I needed to actually make it for myself. And I thought, okay, let's just do a reel of this. And so if you go on my Instagram and scroll back, you can find this where I put together the concoction. It was something like orange gelatin and cottage cheese, and I think crushed pineapple, tangerines, or mandarin oranges, and maybe Cool Whip. It seems like I'm forgetting an ingredient. Mixed it up, and I put it in the freezer because remember, Lulu's in a hurry, and so
Yeah.
she's trying to make it quickly. She puts it in the freezer. So I kept it in there for a few hours. I take it out and I plop it into a bowl. And I mean, just the sound of it is something else. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to take a taste. Now, mind you, I am not an adventurous eater by any means, but I took a spoonful of it and tasted it. And unfortunately, I did describe it perfectly. It was a combination of both gritty and slimy at the same time. So that's the only recipe from the book that I've actually made for myself, but I do not recommend that you try that one at home.
Yeah, you're not gonna put that recipe in like the book club
No,
kit. No.
no, no.
Megan, I was going to ask too, because in the author's note, you mentioned that the bell jar was such
Mhm.
a, and I'm like in the minority here, and I haven't read that. And now it's on my list, and I need to get to it because it seems I've heard it mentioned in so many different places. And maybe can you just talk a little bit about how that connected to your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the bell jar, it kind of came up because my middle daughter, my middle child, my eldest daughter, she was the one who was helping me with the concept of the book, and she's an avid reader, and she's really been going through classics and banned books and everything, and she wanted to read the bell jar. And in the time that I was really considering this idea and putting it together. And I had this thought. I had just reread it and I was annotating it and really digging deeply into it. And when my daughter read it, she said it was good, but it wasn't as compelling as I was hoping it would be. It wasn't quite the page turner that she wanted it to be. And she's right. I mean, it is an amazing story that Sylvia Plath wrote, but it's not the most gripping of stories. And her main character, Esther Greenwood, is not Lulu. She's single. She doesn't really want to get married. She's trying to figure out what she's doing with the rest of her life, and she is very depressed. But she does experience electroshock therapy in the book, and so there are elements of that main character, Esther Greenwood, that I wove into the Mad Wife because I was really challenging myself to see if I could take a similar sort of like mental health story set within that same era of the 1950s, but do it in a way that's more of a page turner so that someone like my daughter would pick it up and just couldn't stop turning the pages. And if you caught on, the main character's name is Esther Greenwood. And so I named Lulu's child Esther, and then her neighborhood is Greenwood because they're both nods to the bell jar itself. Now, another element layered in there is that Sylvia Plath was inspiration. Her real life was also inspiration because the when oh goodness, what is her name? When Bitsy's sister Ellen, right? I think I have the right name. Shoot, I don't have her character name written down there. The way she takes her life is actually what Sylvia Plath did. And so Sylvia Plath's actual life and death were inspiration within the story itself. And so I read her journals, portions of her journals were published, and I actually read the journals to really get myself into that mindset of what Sylvia, experienced for herself too.
Wow, I did not know that. Thank you. That's fascinating. It's just fascinating how authors like you just take from like so you get your ideas from so many places and to put it all together for a book that just stands out and is so good. It's just beyond impressive.
It is very fascinating, even as an author myself. I listened to the audiobook over the weekend, and
Oh, okay.
I had forgotten certain things that I had actually put into the book. And there are times when I when I re-encounter my books after a distance, and I feel almost vulnerable because exactly like you were saying, like I can see this thread from this part of my life and this one all coming together. And I'm like, I just put that on the page for complete strangers to read, you know? But of course, nobody ever knows how much of the author is actually in it or, you know, the author's experiences or whatever. But it is a very fascinating process to yeah, I mean, you could have two authors with the exact same concept. You give them the same concept to build a story off, and they will be vastly different because it is our observations and our experiences that weave together to make these stories complete. And so it is a bizarre process that I don't understand either.
It's also been fun watching you on Instagram, doing your visits with the glasses and everything. But can you talk about the cover of the book? And it's so eye-catching. I think a lot of people have mentioned that they picked it up solely based on the cover. So that was a big win.
Yeah, and I tell you, like, I really and truly believe that the instant New York Times bestseller status is because of that cover. And I know that this book has great word of mouth potential because of that twist and that reveal and readers wanting to talk about it.
Mhm.
But I did not expect to make that list week one. And I know that it is in large part thanks to Barnes& and Noble and people walking into the store and seeing Lulu's image right there in front of them. And so I'm with Sourcebooks as my publisher, and we have a collaborative relationship when it comes to cover and title. Ultimately, they have final say, but we work together in trying to find something that everyone likes. But Sourcebooks also runs everything through data testing. They test covers, they test titles. So they don't just go on vibes and feelings. They're really testing these to try to see what is going to speak most to that ideal reader. And so I loved my second cover for the girls we sent away. And I was like, I will never have another cover that I love as much as this one. So I didn't have much expectation for the Mad Wife. And they sent me six concepts. And one of them was this concept, except it was cropped like right at her eyes. So her eyes were cropped off the top of the book. And then there was another one that had four different women with the black bars over their eyes. And I didn't like that concept because, well, there are the four women in the neighborhood. I felt that putting them on the cover made it seem like an ensemble story instead of Lulu's story. And ultimately, this is Lulu's story. So I just said, hey, could we possibly take this concept and zoom out and then apply that black bar over her eye? And they did that, and it was just like everybody was like, that's it. That's the cover. Of course, they still tested it, and thankfully the testing came back strong. But it is a very striking cover. And then those glasses, I was going to like make something with like just cheap sunglasses and like black poster board or something. And I got on Amazon and I just typed in black bar sunglasses. And what do you know? These things exist. I have no idea why. I mean, I think maybe Lulu designed them for me. I don't know. But yeah, those have been such a hit. And that's what's so fun about this cover too, is just seeing readers recreate it, just taking their own picture with a book and then putting the black bar over their eyes. And so it's just a packaging that just came together. I mean, it's really what you always hope for is just that you can find that perfect representation of the story like that.
You never know what it's
No.
going to turn out like.
Yep.
The bar is just so clever. It's just such a twist. If she was there with just her regular face, it would still look really nice, but that just is so catchy.
Right. It has that layer
Oh.
of intrigue to it that otherwise without it just wouldn't be quite as evocative and strike curiosity in the same way as it does with the black bar.
Mhm. Definitely.
You mentioned the book just being in front of Barnes and Noble. How did that process work for the book's selection, and when did you find out about it and the moving of the publication date? Can you walk us kind of behind the scenes of
Yeah.
how that went for your team?
Yeah, so I have no idea why Barnes& and Noble decided to choose my book out of all of the other options, and I have no idea why they said we want that one, but we want it for October. No clue. All I know is that in late July, I got an email from my editor, and she said, I have some fun news for you. Can you jump on a call tomorrow? And then I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And then I realized it wasn't just the two of us. It was my agent, it was my marketing team. There were other people being added to this call. And then I'm texting my agent and I'm like, are they coordinating with Oprah? Like, what is going on right now? Like, we knew that it was big news because my editor does not just ask for random calls like that, and especially when there's a whole team that's going to be a part of it. So I knew that it was going to be something big, but I had no idea when they gave me the news. I still didn't fully comprehend it. I was like, but there's a lot of books being released. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they didn't choose mine as the fiction pick. But then when they said October, I was like, wait a minute, how's this work? Because the book releases in November. And so they said, yeah, we're moving everything up by about a month and a half. And so that, like I said, that was the end of July. And so it was a whirlwind for, especially, I mean, Sourcebooks was doing so much behind the scenes with marketing and printing and distribution and everything to make sure that these books would be ready in time. And this is also why the audiobook is not released yet, is because the audiobook had it on their schedule for recording and everything else to be released in November. And even though, my editor contacted them immediately. They just weren't able to pivot that quickly to get it ready for release day. So it is coming and it is amazing. I've listened to it. Susan Bennett has voiced all three of my books now, and she is an incredible narrator. So it's on its way, but it won't be here until November 4th.
Okay, so
Yeah, Anna
oh yeah.
just said she listened to the ARC audiobook and it
Nice.
was great.
I agree, Anna. I just listened this weekend and I think Susan just voiced it so well. So I'm glad you liked it too.
Yes. So do audiobook sales go towards a bestseller status or not typically?
That's a good question that I should know the answer to. So the tricky thing is the different lists are calculated differently. Okay. So when it comes to, but I still think if I have this correct, USA Today, I believe they factor in paperback, hardcover, which mine released at the same time. That's because Sourcebooks favors paperback, but libraries want hardcover. So Sourcebooks typically, if they know there's going to be library demand, they release them on the same day. So again, USA Today takes those two and Kindle or ebook. I'm not sure if I don't think audiobook is factored in. With New York Times, they have they have trade paperback, which is where I've landed. They have a hardcover list. They also have a combined list, but I still think that combined is only print and ebook. I'm not sure the audio is factored into that one.
Okay, interesting. Because I was just wondering if that would like hamper your sales a little bit, but I feel like maybe it could give it a second wind, in
I think so too.
November.
Yeah, well, and I know multiple ebook listeners audio listeners who have actually went out and purchased a hard copy because they couldn't get the audiobook at release. So in a way, I
True.
think it kind of helped boost my bestseller status a little bit more by not having the audiobook on release day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Laura Beth is one of our readers here. I don't know if she's free, but she's submitted a question ahead of
I'm
time.
here.
Oh, you're here. Oh, good. Hi.
Yeah. Hey,
Hey,
hey, Meg.
Elsie. How are
Hey,
you
Megan,
doing?
how are you doing?
Good.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the very beginning of this book because there is a warning that you put out there, and I think that I don't know why. I just wanted to ask you why
Yeah.
and why did you want to make that choice?
Yeah, thank you for asking me this. And this was a tricky decision. Just I am not a reader who needs a trigger warning going into a book. And I've never written a trigger warning before. But with this one, there are dark, heavy themes in it. But the trick is, how do I give a warning without also spoiling very essential elements of the story? And so I debated this. I had conversations with my agent, with my editor, with other author friends, like, how do you think I should handle this? And so what I ended up settling on was basically this idea of, stories meet us at the right time, hopefully in our lives, but sometimes, if the pages get heavy, please set it down because it is heavy, especially for women who have experienced for themselves some of these darker, topics within the book. And so I felt that I did because of the suicidal ideation, because of the stillbirth, because of some things like that. I felt it did need some sort of warning, but I also needed to walk that line of how to do that without spoiling essential plot twists to come too.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated that you didn't go into specifics
Okay,
for that trigger warning. And it felt like a friend was talking to me in the moment, like holding my hand, like, if you're ready, go. If you're not, just put it down. It'll be fine, and then you can
good.
pick it up at another time. So I liked that line that you traveled. So I thought I just want to tell you good job on that.
Good. Thank you. And I appreciate that too, because I didn't want it to feel mechanical and clinical either, you
Yeah.
know? So I appreciate that so much. Thanks, LB.
Hey, congratulations on this book.
Thank you.
Think the last author's note too was so comprehensive that you
Mhm.
put together and really thoughtful and added so much to the book as well. How did you decide what to incorporate in that? Because it's really a big part of the book. And you also mentioned this contains spoilers, like
Right.
don't read it. So you're
Don't read
so
it.
so thoughtful, like all the way through, beginning to end.
Thank you. Yeah, so with all of my books, I do an author's note because I also edit manuscripts, stories for authors, and I always say the author will know so much more research and information and backstory than what belongs on the page itself. Like as the author, we have to be discerning. We have to really be as minimalistic and effective as possible. But the author's note is that way to kind of round out the story and kind of give a little peek behind the curtain as to some of the other stuff that went into the making of it that doesn't necessarily apply on the page to the character's story itself. And so the author's note has been essential in each of my books. I'm so excited to say that this is the first audiobook, though, where the author's note will be included. It is not in the ALC because I finished it and I was like, no, it's not there. And I reached out to Susan and she's like, no, don't worry. I recorded it. It should be in the finished version. And I was like, thank goodness, because I've had listeners in the past say they felt cheated out of the author's note not being in the audio version. Because as one early reader said of The Madwife, she felt that the author's note was the true epilogue of the story. And I thought, wow, that's a good way to say it, because I do think that it adds a lot of content and information that that helps show what shaped what went into really putting together the story. And the process of writing this was just so fascinating for me, with those experiences of the potential ghost that was haunting me on the writing retreat and things like that. And so to be able to share some of that with readers, because that's a lot of what I talk about at author events, but I don't get to stand in front of every single reader and share that information. And so the back of the book is that opportunity to be able to do that.
Yeah, it was definitely an author's note that I remember telling people, don't skip it, don't skip it. And that's not usual because sometimes they don't hold as much dear information. And that
Mhm.
yours was definitely one where I was like, you can't miss the author's note.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, Laura said, why can't they add it on later?
Oh, for like previous audiobooks that don't have it?
That is a good question.
Yeah,
And maybe I can request that, because I do think that, especially the girls we sent away with the whole maternity home research and stuff that I did for that one, that is one that I do think that the author's note would be really beneficial to add it to.
agreed. Ask them to do it because I do. I feel like it's the bookend. Like we need it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
please.
Okay, and Jessica made a comment in the chat. She said, not a question, just a comment. I work for the Arthritis Foundation and hear from so many women that their chronic pain and health issues are dismissed, misdiagnosed, gaslit, etc. So Lulu's story really resonated with me.
Thank you, Jessica. And thanks for bringing that up too, because what I didn't talk about in the research is some of the research was just anecdotal in the stories of women I know and the struggles that they've had over years of receiving a proper diagnosis. And so, I talk about in that author's note, the ghosts that went into the making of the story. And one of the ghosts is the every woman of women who have experienced this even today. And I talk about in the author's note, the signing into law in 1993 that women's bodies have to be studied at the same rate as men's in medical studies that are NIH funded. And because a lot of this misunderstanding is the fact that our bodies have not been studied equally. I was having this conversation with my brother over the weekend. He finished reading the book and we got into all of this and I was like, you realize like hormones affect us, right? But hormones also affect studies, which is why scientists always preferred studying men instead of women because you have a better baseline with a man because they don't have the hormone fluctuations. This work in progress that is different than what I've written before has to do with perimenopause. And I'm like, yeah, and perimenopause is wild because hormones are all over the place, up and down and everything else. But again, it's something that really, even today, has not been studied very much on women. And so here we all are experiencing the season of our lives with these weird symptoms and everything else. And yet we have few answers because the studying is difficult. It's not easy and it hasn't been done. And yet here we are just trying to, find our way through it and keep the smile on our face while we're at it too.
Well, that's so interesting you mentioned that because in our book club, that's exactly what we were talking about, perimenopause and like the
Mhm.
connection of like how women's bodies haven't been studied. And we just don't know much about like hormone replacement therapy and like just
Right.
menopause and just the money has gone towards men's studies. And so
Yeah.
we're still lagging behind in that regard. And so we
Yeah.
spoke specifically about perimenopause and menopause in
Mhm.
regards to the Mad Wife. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting to hear that your next writing adventure is kind of going in
Mhm.
that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the next one is not under contract. Who knows if my editor is going to want it or not, but it really in some ways did feel like the next step in writing. It's not, I don't mean to write about women's health. It's just part of women's experiences, basically. And with the perimenopause, I mean, I'm in that season for myself of experiencing things like anxiety that I never had before, or tinnitus, or just rage sometimes that again, these things that I never really experienced. And then realizing I'm not alone. Like this is happening to so many other women. And this happened to women in previous generations. It just wasn't discussed and talked about, let alone studied on a scientific level.
Right. Or diagnosed under that, blanket of hysteria.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like the blanket diagnosis for women now is fibromyalgia.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I feel like when people don't know what to make of something, like it just seems like doctors like slap on fibromyalgia and just like call it a day. And
Yeah.
that could be just completely inaccurate, but just women just in my life that I'm aware of and
Hmm.
my husband is a doctor and I feel like he's always like, mentioning, oh, people came in and they've got fibromyalgia and it's like, what does that even mean, you know?
Right.
Or
Right.
even if you
So
mention the premenopause, they'll just say, "Yeah, that's probably what it is." And they're like, "Okay, what do I do about it? What am I supposed to do?" And it's like, "Well, just hang in there." Or it can be a long time from now that
Yeah.
it'll last for a long time. Or I mean, there's just like never
Yeah.
one telling you, I don't know, what to do. Because same thing. I feel all those things
Right.
that you're mentioning.
Yeah, yeah. So my mom, who the Mad Wife is dedicated to because of her lifelong struggles with anxiety, when she was in her mid 40s, she had a season of insomnia, and that heightened her anxiety. It was really, I mean, she pretty much had a mental breakdown at that stage. And she went with me to my first two tour events that were back in Indiana. And so we spent multiple hours in the car driving between Indianapolis and South Bend at the northern part of the state. And I started talking to her about that. And I was like, Mom, do you think that maybe your insomnia and your heightened anxiety in that season was perimenopause? And she was like, huh, I don't know. Maybe you're right. And it was like because I had started piecing some of that together as of recent. And just as we started talking about it more, it was like I really do bet that that was really part of what she was dealing with, but the doctor had no idea. Thankfully, she got put on some anti-anxiety medication that definitely helped. But yeah, it's just that so many every woman goes through this and yet it's still so misunderstood.
Mhm. Right. Like Wendy said, if men went through menopause as we do, they'd be hospitalized. Although they do go through hormonal changes, I believe women handle pain differently,
Yep.
better.
Have you seen those videos where they put the
Mhm.
notes on the men so that they
Uh,
experience period
Contractions.
period
cramps? Yep.
cramps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, same thing. Yep.
Yes, there is a one video that I've seen. It's two black men and they're in a library. And so they're like supposed to be quiet. It is hysterical if you need a good laugh.
Oh my
Check that
goodness.
out. But yes, so I that's so great that you're kind of working in that direction for me, maybe this next writing project because we can see the parallels between the Madwife and kind of women's health now.
Yep.
Could we talk
Well,
about this next writing? Is that something
I
that?
I can tell you a little bit about it. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to
okay,
go anywhere.
sure.
I have about 50,000 words in it. And remember, I'm not a plotter, so I've been sort of intuitively feeling my way through this. But basically, the general idea is that this is a woman in her midlife. She is Midwestern. She is a mid-list author. She's very mid, and she returns to her hometown, which is on Lake Michigan, because her father's health is ailing because he's dealing with Parkinson's disease. And along with her goes her angsty teenager. So basically, she is in that sandwich generation of life where she is trying to care for an elderly parent while also dealing with an angsty teen, and neither one of them wants to be parented by her. And it's really that question for her of, am I allowed to have a midlife crisis in the midst of all of this? Because it's really a second coming of age story of a woman dealing with all the perimenopause symptoms and everything else and trying to find who she is and what she wants that second half of life to be. And then there's some sort of mystical, magical otter that kind of plays a role as a muse that she has been seeking and stuff. And so there's still stuff to be figured out. It's not yet ready to pitch to my editor. But after coming out of the Madwife, writing it was very immersive for me in ways I hadn't experienced with my first two. And I needed something that wasn't quite as dark and heavy as The Madwife. And so this has some humor to it. There's a scene right now where there's a squirrel funeral that takes place. And so there's a little bit more levity and some sarcasm and things like that in the book. And it was really just a nice break for me and a little bit of an experiment to try something new because it's modern and contemporary. It's not historical and it's set in the Midwest, which is where I'm from. So it feels like also returning to my roots and getting to explore the Midwestern mentality and stuff. So we'll see. When I pitch it to my editor, she might be like, well, I'm glad you had fun with that, but now really, what are you working on next? So who knows?
Well,
Um,
Ivana and I are both Midwestern girls.
yes,
So
we
where
are.
on Lake Michigan is this book set?
So I have made up a fictitious town because I didn't want to be tied to a specific town. So the
Mhm.
name of the town that I've created is Midhaven, which I think is
Okay.
pretty clever
Yeah.
because there's Grand
Okay.
Haven and
Grand
there's
Haven,
South
South
Haven.
Haven.
Yes. And
Yes.
she's like in the, she's mid. She's in
She's
the
in the
mid
mid.
stages, right? Like I think it's brilliant. They should buy it on the title alone, right?
I love that. I love that so much.
Great.
Okay. That's great. Are you from Michigan? I'm from Michigan.
I'm from Northern Indiana, so just
Okay.
across the state
So,
line.
okay, but
Yes.
you're familiar with. Okay, that's
Yes.
great. I love this.
Yes.
This has
Yes.
to happen.
Nice.
I
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Midhaven.
Love
Well,
it.
what are you reading right now? Or what books are you excited about? Or any we just always love to hear from authors about kind of some of their favorites.
Yes, yes, I have a few to share. Okay, speaking of Midwest, I am in the process of slow reading Buckeye right now. And, a good Ohio Midwestern story, loving it, but I did put it on pause because I got my hands on an early copy of Tara Shelton Harris's next
Yeah.
book, Where the Wildflowers Grow. She is amazing. I mean, she's my book bestie, but she's also an incredible writer. And so that has my attention at the moment, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm about halfway through that. That releases, I believe it's February 17th, so mid-February. Going to be amazing. And then I'm going to share over the year. I have absolutely loved The Road to Tender Hearts
Yeah.
by Annie Hartnett. This book, I mean, I don't know, like what my, trigger warning note before beginning says in The Madwife about stories finding you at the right time. And this was one of those that just hit my heart, just like the way that I needed it, with this quirky road trip of an elderly man and these foster kids who suddenly land in his lap, and then a cat that can predict death. I mean, that was what sold me on the concept, was the cat that can predict death. And I just really love the story.
Yes. Those are both great. We actually hosted Tara for her debut for Chapters and Chats, and
Right.
she was delightful, and we
Yeah.
loved hearing from her.
Yes, yeah, she's amazing. And if have you gotten your hands on Wildflowers yet?
I have I think I have an arc on NetGalley, so
Okay,
it's waiting.
okay, good. Yeah, yes, it's great in typical Tara fashion. So
Yes, her stories are so unique.
yes,
Great. Well, any other questions that people have? Oh, Lisa said she just finished Annie's book and loved it. Yes, I
yeah.
did too. Any questions for Megan before we wrap up that we missed?
I had a question. Hi, Megan. I was curious about Lulu's relationship with her mother and her father. I just thought that it was so tumultuous but loving, and just kind of how you decided to write that because they were both also really good characters.
Yeah, thank you. I did a lot of deep character work on this story of really, figuring out that backstory and those dynamics and relationships because really backstory plays a key role, in this book as to who Lulu is and why she does not feel a part of suburban America, because she has that longing for that farm life. And again, like kind of tapping into the Midwestern mentality, I think that her mother is sort of representative of that sort of stoicism and sort of lacking emotional availability and stuff. And actually there is a line that I could not read on edits without crying, and it is when she returns home at the very end and she knocks on the door and her brother answers. And then she says she saw for the first time what she'd never seen before, and that was her mother running toward her. And so, because her mother was just such an emotionally distant person who was more concerned about, the practicality of life instead of just enjoying, what was in front of you. And so that moment to me, it might be subtle, but to me, it spoke volumes as to how much Lulu did always mean to her. And that was evident when she, returned home and her mother ran to her in that sort of way. But yeah, that family life was just, I always knew that it was essential in creating who Lulu is, because of the highs and the lows of what that family experienced. The loss of her father, who she knew unconditional love with, and then how that would affect her, and then the illness of her brother that she questioned if she was responsible for because she took him to the watering hole and he contracted polio because of it, and then it had the lifelong consequences on him and her mother as well. And so I say my main characters, like speaking of Tara, like she writes multi POV, and I cannot do that. I can't fathom that because I get so into that one main character that it's hard for me to imagine being able to do that equal footing for more than one character. But and so with getting deep into this character, I knew that I really needed to explore those familial dynamics and how they really, it's nature versus nurture too, and how they really affected her and shaped her, not just as a child, but into adulthood as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it just reminded me of how my mother talked about her mother, and
Mm.
that growing up, she did everything for her father, so my grandfather, and like cooking, and the cleaning, and that checklist, and how stoic her mother was, and didn't feel like she had that love, but yet, yes, I saw many things from my grandmother that she loved my mother. So I just thought you represented that time period very well from all the women that you put in your book. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great question, Sarah. Any other questions for Megan? If
We would
not,
love to
oh,
take a picture with you.
Sure.
I was going to ask if that's okay.
Yep.
Unless there is there anything, Kelly?
no, I don't think so.
Okay,
Unless,
perfect.
yeah,
If you
last
would
call.
grab your books, I have mine an e-reader. Okay. Okay. Two fingers. Okay. One, two, three. There we go. Yay. Oh, what a great chat, and so informative, and so you like just elevated the book even more for us. Just this was
Yes.
so wonderful.
Thank you. So maybe along with the author note, I should include like an author video where then I talk through it too.
Like that in there somehow.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for gifting us with your time and your words. And we're so grateful that you were able to join us. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And thank you so much for reading too, because I tell you, like, this is my office where I work alone except for my dog. And I never know if anyone's going to read any of my stories. And so I'm always amazed when a reader chooses to pick it up when you have so many options out there. And so thank you for choosing to spend time with Lulu and with me this evening. I really appreciate it.
Best of
Congratulations.
luck
We're
with
rooting for
everything.
you.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Good
Megan.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.